I am up at home in Yorkshire. I'm in my mum's painting studio and I wanted to do another of these stitch and chat videos, but I just finished my embroidery. So the one I was stitching in the last video, this piece here, I've now finished my piece Night Fishing. And so rather than a stitch and chat, I thought I would make this instead a frame and chat. So I'm going to show you how I mount it all up and I'm going to paint the frame for it whilst we talk about something else. So I'm not quite sure how long this will take to do. I'm going to say grab yourself your sewing or grab a project, get a cup of tea and sit with me and let's work on this together. So this piece, this one, my Night Fishing, is actually going to be a pair. And it's a paired embroidery with this piece I've got here, which I've done before, which is my Red Sky at Night piece. This is sort of the whole thing of this is that old saying, red sky at night, shepherd's delight. So that's sort of what I'm doing. And, you know, it's a shepherd and heading home at the end of a day. So that piece there is my Red Sky at Night. And I want that one to be a paired design to go with this one, my Night Fishing one. And it sort of feels like a pair because it's the same figure, you know, under the moonlight and the same trees and everything. And the whole thing feels kind of really beautifully paired, very different colours and everything. But I want them to sit as a pair. And so my intention is to kind of paint a frame in the same style as this one, but instead using all the colours from within the embroidery itself. I have a frame and you'll notice a slightly bodged little bit of painting on it because I used this frame with the group at my last retreat I ran. I used it with the group so they could have a test and they could all try out kind of painting the base coat on it. Basically, I wanted them to see how dry your brush should be when you base coat. So it's already slightly painted, but it's the exact colour I'm going to want to paint the frame in. So before I can start doing the framing, what I do need to do is mount this embroidery up. So it's all finished, but it needs to be mounted and stretched. And the way I do that is on this foam board. And so whenever we have a kit, whenever we sell our frames, they're always sold with a piece of foam board inside it and a little mounting kit. So what I'm going to do to begin with is just mount up the embroidery. And I don't want this video to be a sort of how-to video. So I'm just going to get on and mount up my piece. But I will try put in the cards a link because I do have a video that's specifically on how to mount your embroidery. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just gonna work and we'll chat as I work on it. So here I go first. Oh God. Top tip number one, don't pour your pins out on top of your piece because they all get stuck in the threads. So whilst I get this piece all pinned up and pinned into place, one of the things I wanted to talk about for today's video is a bit of a kind of, it's an article that I put out for studio members. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago for all my studio membership, which are all kind of the people who've chosen to join our membership program. They get access to a little bit more kind of written stories and things, like a bit like a journal almost. And those can be anything from new bits of inspiration I found, kind of favourite books and things like that, or slightly more businessy related things. And the hard thing of running a creative business is that you're constantly balancing those two aspects of the business. You know, most of my week is not spent doing creative things. Most of my week is spent working on business things. And then I get the odd day of play. When I get time to finish pieces like this is in the evening. So much like anyone else who's working in a kind of professional job or, you know, something else, in all likelihood, in the same way that you'd fit your sewing into the evenings, even though sewing is my job, I am still fitting my sewing into the evenings as well. So one of the things I write to people about and what I tend to kind of do in those written pieces to all my studio members is do a real mix of anything that's affecting me, anything that I'm thinking about. I kind of always think, well, I'd be quite interested in knowing about a business as well. And so whether that is something creative, but quite often actually it ends up not being hugely creative topics. Quite often it can end up being things which are a little bit more existential, I'll say. Things like, you know, do I have a style, or God, should I be trying to grow faster, or how should I try and grow my business, and what should we be doing? Should we be working on new products? Should we be just working on marketing? All those sorts of things that go through the mind of every small business owner. And sometimes it's quite useful for me to vocalise. So one of the things I wrote to everyone about in my newsletter a couple of weeks ago was a little bit about what I'd been doing over the summer. And if you, after kind of the YouTube channels, if you followed me on my Instagram account or anything, Instagram is kind of where I tend to do the slightly more daily updates of things that are going on in my stories, not on my posts, but in my stories on Instagram. I tend to post about anything that's really exciting me. I think it's kind of quite a nice place in stories to just have really casual content to share, things that you wouldn't necessarily want everyone to know, and so you're kind of reserving it for those who really care about what you do. And one way of working out who really cares about what you do is the number of people that regularly come and watch your stories, because I think I only ever really watch the stories of brands that I'm sort of really invested in. So on my stories, if you followed on Instagram, you would have seen that I've sort of over the last few weeks, I am an enthusiastic person, but I've been particularly enthusiastic at the moment. I feel like there's loads of new things happening, new ideas we've got in the works, things I've been wanting to work on for absolutely ages, and they're all just sort of coming together. Things are sort of all starting to come together at the right point in time. And right now just feels like everything's happening, everything's coming together, and it's really fun. But I think one of the reasons why that's happening is because actually across the summer, I, in all honesty, wasn't finding it all quite so fun. And that's what I thought was nice to tell all my kind of studio members about, because I think you can sometimes have this misconception that we're just having a blast all the time, and actually sometimes the creative process is really hard. So basically, to kind of take you back a bit, I've spoken a bit about it, maybe in my earlier studio diaries, if you've watched my earlier studio diaries. But basically, right at the start of summer, I was approached by a big brand about doing a collaboration. And I haven't done a vast number of collaborations, mainly because we are quite limited on time, and because I'm quite particular about kind of only wanting to work on a collaboration if I really feel like it's a brand I want to work with, or something that's kind of meaningfully different than one I could do on our own, because collaborations sort of bring with them, as much as it brings better exposure, it also can bring a level of stress because you're accommodating multiple perspectives. But when this one I got approached about in the summer, it was a really big brand, really major product, something really exciting that could be amazing exposure for us as a business. So even though I don't tend to typically do collaborations, it felt like far too good an opportunity to sort of to miss. So let me just check. Now I have to step back into my process and check that this is in the right place. And I think it's sort of in the right place, but very slightly too high. You can see, it's basically I pinned it all into place. Got my first line of pins in, but I can tell when I actually put it all in, this is going to slip slightly too high. You might see I'll show on this camera, there's a few lines and markings like these. Now these are all done in a kind of heat erasable pen. So once I've finished, I will go and just go over the top of them and remove the lines, but I can't be bothered yet. I'll do it later, basically. So I'm going to stretch it all down a bit. Yes, so over the summer I was working with this brand on a collaboration, big new brief, and one of the things that I found very exciting about it was this thought that it would show my ability to turn my creative hand to something new. And so this was an illustration brief. It wasn't anything to do with textiles, it wasn't anything to do with sewing. It was me just designing for a major product from their range. And that was the whole premise. What was quite nerve-wracking for me about it was the fact that it was not like anything I'd ever done before. In case you don't know my background, I only started sewing now it's probably about seven years ago, but my entire background before then was in sort of the sciences and finance. I worked as an investment banker for years, and at university I studied chemistry, and my subjects were always sciences. So it's amazing to get approached about an illustration brief, but also incredibly intimidating because illustration is a very technical process. I can edit an image in Photoshop using their auto tone and auto contrast. That's about as far as I go. I've never opened Adobe Illustrator, even though I have it on my computer. It's quite so I was intimidated from a skill set perspective more than anything. I wasn't sure actually how you do illustration beyond, say, draw a picture. So that was one of the things that intimidated me about it. The other one was right at the beginning. I was presented with quite a detailed brief, and I found that quite intimidating, because what's quite intimidating about having a detailed brief is I'm not someone who has ever really worked in that way before. I design everything I do. I design for the Fabled Thread. I design with no brief, and I design in a very free manner, kind of depending on whatever I'm feeling. I mean, like these embroideries have come out of sort of, they come out of thin air, really. There's necessarily no rationale. And then once I've designed something I really like, afterwards I might think, oh, I'm going to work out what is this all about. I'm going to work out maybe this whole thing is a series. Maybe this is going to be a range of kits. I tend to work it out once I've done the designing, not before I've done the designing. So working to brief is entirely different. And whilst I did have some experience working with brands, I'd done a collaboration with Schumacher, kind of big US textiles designer, and I'd also done I've got a collaboration with William Morris, which I think will be launching very soon. I've also worked with Emma Bridgewater, which is a pottery, quite a very well-known ceramics business here in the UK. But each of those collaborations were very free. I was given wide scope because it wasn't a product in their range which was crucial. It wasn't a critical product. For them, it was also part of it was a kind of marketing activity in a way as well. They wanted to work with me. They wanted the Fabled Thread name on things, and we were producing things to do with textiles. Now, where this differed is it was designing a product which they have a lot of pressure on. Like, there's a lot of pressure every year on the entire team around that product, and therefore you've got a lot of people involved, and rightly so, a lot of people wanting to make sure we get it right, which meant that the brief was a lot more prescriptive than anything I'd worked to before. And whilst I found that quite difficult right at the beginning, actually one thing, we should give ourselves credit where credit's due. Right at the beginning, I found it quite hard to kind of get my head around. But once I worked out almost in a problem-solving way of what is my way of interpreting a brief. If I'm asked for something very specific, I don't have to give that, but I can find out what is it that they're really asking behind the scenes that they want about this and find a way of kind of interpreting it in my style. And so actually I feel like what went really well on the collaboration is that it gave me real confidence, because actually I found a route that I felt really excited about, really passionate about. And the whole team there were super excited about it. It was very different from anything they'd done before, but we were all going with it, all super happy. And so that was fun to do, if a little intense because it was such a tight timeline. So basically from July until the middle of August, really. So about 7 or 8 weeks, I was working on this particular brief, and I was developing the artwork for it, and we were making a lot of progress, and we got quite close. And then at the end of August, I went on holiday. And when I got back, unfortunately, they had a bit of a change of heart about it all. And I think, I absolutely no kind of ill feelings about it, because I think it was what I was doing was pushing them very far out of their comfort zone. And so probably when you're that far out your comfort zone, they were investing heavily in it, there's a lot of people on it. it's absolutely fair enough that they should want to feel 100% confident in where the route was going. And sadly, they didn't feel like that, which for me was a real kind of confidence knock, because I loved it. And so then when you love something and someone else you're working with doesn't love something, that can feel a little bit like, you know, is there something wrong with me? Am I missing something here? Anyway, what was quite complimentary in a way about it all was when I came back from holiday and they thought, you know, they want to kind of revisit, start back from the beginning again. They wanted me to go back to the beginning, and they said to me they want me to imagine what would I have created if I had no brief. And that is quite complimentary, because they said they sort of wanted me to be more me, which I do think is a real complimentary thing to be told. It wasn't at that point them saying kind of, no, can you just do exactly this? They said, you know, go wild. What would you do if you could do anything you wanted? And so it took a bit of time. I took like 4 days away from it all. And then when I went back to it, I had a brand new idea, and one that I was so excited about. Sort of, I was, you know, when you get one of those ideas and you're sort of up till kind of 5 a.m, because you are so excited to work on something. Well, basically I had that situation. I presented then a week later a whole new concept, a whole new route to them. And I'm sure lots of you have been in this position, whatever you do in life, if you ever have that situation where you present something, whether it's kind of professionally, personally, to your family, an idea, something you're really excited about, and you just can tell that it doesn't land on the other side in the same way. You can just tell that even though they can display enthusiasm, it's not that burning passion that you feel inside. And so they took the brief away for the weekend. But I could tell that Friday that it wasn't going to be something that they were going to immediately say yes to, which is tough. And what ended up happening was they kind of came back, and when they came back to me, they said they were happy to go down that route. They liked some of the main principles of it, but then they started giving very prescriptive thoughts on exactly how they then wanted it to be executed, kind of down to kind of particular colours, particular patterns. And it's just not the way I work. I worried that what would end up happening was I effectively became a facilitator. I wasn't the creative. And also that I was being asked to make changes that weren't me. And as much as this is something which has great exposure, equally at the same time, you can have great exposure and it be wonderful for your business. You can have great exposure and it can be really terrible for your business. And it reached basically an impasse where I kind of felt like I wasn't happy to make the level of changes they wanted, and they weren't happy for me not to make the changes. So basically they chose then that whilst they love my work, maybe actually I just wasn't the right choice for this particular project. There was too much pressure on the project and I'm a bit too out there with my aesthetic. But to be honest, the moment that happened, and the moment they sort of decided actually they were going to find someone else to work with on this particular project at this point in time, I just felt this immense sense of relief. There's obviously a large part of me felt initially shame. You know, you feel shame because you feel like you failed, that you've loved something and you haven't been able to convince someone else to love it too. And that I found quite sort of not a great confidence thing. But what I did feel was a sense of relief that I wasn't going to have to keep forcing this design or keep having to work in this way, which I'd found very challenging from a creative perspective, quite kind of emotionally draining. I'd sort of lost the joy in the creative process. So why am I telling you all this? basically this actually absorbed kind of pretty much all my creative time from the start of July till really the middle of September. And whilst at first I kind of found it quite sad in a way, the fact that this design I'm so enthusiastic about, like really feel proud of, will never see the light of day. Like it will never become anything, it will never become a product. It was far too specific to the brand. There's no ability to reuse it. That's really disappointing because I was really proud of it. But if I take the kind of look from a distance and having taken a bit of time to reflect, one thing it has shown me is how much more confident I am now than I would have been 5 years ago or when I first started the business. I am so proud that I was able to do it and create something that I genuinely think people would have loved. Like I never would have 5 years ago been able to do what I've done this year. And as much as it wasn't right for them, I don't think that's because there was something wrong with it. And I wouldn't change anything about what I'd done creatively. So actually what it showed me was really positive, that it was my first ever illustration project. And technically I was able to pick up the skills and actually creatively I was able to work to a brief. But what it has shown me is maybe some of the challenges of working in collaboration. And it's made me rethink a little bit how I approach those in future. So anyone who's been kind of following the business for a while knows that around about between last May and last February, so for about 4 or 5 months last year, I was doing this big business training program through Goldman Sachs. They run it across the UK, US, parts of Europe. It's called 10,000 Small Businesses, and it's basically like a 5-month mini MBA in which, using the support of their kind of amazing mentors, you get guided through creating a business plan. So I was working on this all of last May, and whilst I was doing that and writing a business plan, I had kind of different growth areas I wanted to focus on for the business. And one of those growth areas was collaborations. Like one of my big growth pillars was I want to do, I think I'd written down something like 2 to 3 big collaborations every year. This was an amazing thing to come in right at the end of that business plan writing because it was so in line with what my plan was going to be. But how it's all gone, and actually how I found it very stressful. You know, I didn't enjoy the time. I didn't feel uplifted a lot of the time, has made me really rethink whether that is the right thing for me personally within the business plan. Is collaborations actually something that I am going to enjoy? And this business, the Fabled Thread, is a business built from passion. Like, I am not here trying to build a business and get out of it and then kind of retire or anything like that. Like, I love this business with a burning passion. I work really hard because I absolutely love what I do. I love the people I meet. I love the impact it can have on people's lives. Like, this is my passion, and I hope this is my entire life. Like, that's what I hope. So actually, if you in any other kind of business, you would just suck it up and think, oh, I don't hugely enjoy it, but it's really good for business. It's really good for exposure. It's free marketing. I'm leveraging someone else's network. I'm leveraging someone else's audience. You know, anyone else I spoke to at the time thought I was mad for kind of not being willing to make the changes they requested of me. But that's not why I do this job. That's not why I have this business. And so with collaborations, it's not saying I don't think there's something to do, but I think I have to be a lot more careful in future about how I do them. And so I've sort of come up with a little bit of because I love a little bit of a framework for how I would do them in future. And the main things I think I would focus on in future is, firstly, I think there has to be clear boundaries about who is responsible for what and where the creative freedom lies. If it's a case where I am being asked to design something, there needs to be real clarity right at the beginning about what my way of working is and what my style is and the creative freedom I need to have. And that's something that's on me to express, and on the other side to really make sure they understand what do they want, not kind of think, oh yeah, we want that, but then only later on to find out, actually, no, now we think about it, we're not sure we did want that much freedom. So I think whether I'm the collaborator, i.e. the brand working with someone, or if I am the creative that is working with the brand, my big thing now is I think there has to be total alignment from the off, like total alignment from the very beginning. The second thing I think is I have to really assess, why am I doing a particular project? So take this project, for example. It's an illustration brief to design a physical product, nothing to do with textiles and nothing to do with kits. I don't have any interest in becoming an illustrator. I love working creatively, I love doing my designs, but that is not what I want to do. I'm not passionate about it. So the reason I thought this project was good is partly because it was a kind of two-tiered thing. I really wanted to work on the brand, and I really wanted to work on a project of that level of exposure, because I felt like it would be a nice thing to then be able to say to other people, oh, I did that, and they would immediately sort of think, oh, cool, wow. You know, whether that's speaking to people who are friends, to family, to other businesses, to kind of old colleagues. I wanted to be able to tell them something they really understood, because often, maybe if you're watching this, you might feel the same with your crafts. No matter how kind of cool what you're doing is, the moment you say, oh, I run a business that makes embroidery kits, everyone is so judgmental about it. Everyone sort of thinks, right, that what a nice little business you must have. And I always think, no, I have a cool business. I've got an ambitious business. I'm not just sat in my spare room fiddling around. I am still the same ambitious person I've always been. I just happen to be doing it in embroidery now. So for me, really, what my main motivator for doing this project was more ego-driven, I'd say. It wasn't something which was going to build me and gain me more work in an area I wanted, because I didn't want to do more work in that area. So it was realistically what I would call a vanity project, rather than a sanity project. A sanity project, I always think, is something that massively aligns to your goal as a business. And my our whole ethos as a business is we empower creativity. That's my one underlying rule. It's the one thing that defines every single new product I do, is we have to have, every new product has to empower creativity. This actually was just nothing to do with that. So it was a vanity project, not a sanity project. And then the final thing I would consider is what you are sacrificing in order to say yes to something. When opportunities come along, and particularly kind of big shiny objects, it feels like you can just say yes, because you can make anything fit in and you can make anything work. And if the opportunity is good enough, like I have done jobs where I've worked 18-hour days, I can sure as hell do that again, if the opportunity is good enough. But I do think you have a finite reserve of energy, and you have a finite reserve particularly of creative energy. And working on this over the summer meant I didn't work on a ton of other projects. It meant I didn't work creatively on new things for the Fabled Thread. And actually, it's left us in a pretty, not a weak position, but a much worse position than I'd have liked in the run up to Christmas. If I had instead spent that number of days, it was probably altogether kind of about 15 full days. That's like a major amount of time. If I spent that number of full days working on my business, I could have designed multiple new ranges. I could have come up with multiple new products. I could have written loads of articles. I could have recorded loads of videos. I sacrificed my business for the sake of this project, because I got sucked up in the glamour and excitement of the project. And it's not to say that wasn't, I would have made the decision. Sometimes you've got to make the decision, don't you, in order to realise why you shouldn't have made the decision. But what it did show me in future is to be a lot more critical about what I am capable of, and that if I do say yes to something, being very aware that in all likelihood it's going to mean that I am going to have to say no to something else. So where does that leave me at now? Basically, what has ended up happening, and this is where the whole thing came from in the first place, is even in the team, in the company, you know, I'm a happy, positive person. It's just, you know, I always have been, grows up in kind of my family nature, the whole nature of my family, everyone sort of, we're a very positive, contented bunch, luckily. So I've been perfectly happy over the summer, but my team said to me, Jen just basically said to me the other week, she said, you just seem so much more excited now. And I have, since we had the walked away from one another, I suddenly had free time to work on my own creative, and I have gone like mad. I've been so productive. I've got so much done. You know, if you follow on Instagram, you follow along on my newsletter or any of those things, you will have seen the things that are coming, and we have so much going on, so many new things launching, but even just so many new designs that I've managed to get done that are going to be launching next year, or things like this embroidery, kind of finishing this embroidery that I've got now. And all these different things that because of the fact that I just suddenly felt liberated, I felt like I was released, I went on an absolute creative whirlwind. And so it's not to say that will stay the same now, but I do think, having gone through this experience, which obviously it's a sort of very personal stresses and everything, there are so many, of course, more major stresses in the world. It's a very kind of first world problems idea. But I definitely did find this summer a very hard time personally for me. And I have felt like a rediscovery of the joy in my work since the middle of September. And I see that in the flow of designs. I see that in the strength of designs. I see that when I work without boundaries, I produce work that's better. I'm not good boundaried. I'm not good to really tight timelines. I'm not good at being told what to do. And that's just something I've learned about myself. So that's sort of really one of the things that has most affected me, and it's absolutely one of the most important things I've learned this year, and it's something that I will keep with me and reflect on regularly, I'm sure, over the next few years. Perfect timing. So there you go, just mounted him up, all fully mounted. So there you go. Now, if you ever don't mount up your embroidery, if you just put it in a frame, so it all kind of sits all creased and all wrinkly, it's so sad. Like, you have to mount your embroideries, because when you mount them, every single stitch, like, it just pops forward with this, like the way the satin stitches just pops forward. So in truth, it will fit in the frame. So it'll go in like this. Ta-da! Is how it will all sit. So what I am going to do is, that took longer than I expected, I'm going to paint this frame up, and then I'll do another video tomorrow where we can talk about something else and I'll show you decorating the frame. But what I will just end with, and whilst I didn't want this to be a tutorial, obviously I have a choice about what colours I'm going to paint the frame, and I think because this embroidery is so light, obviously I already got people to start test painting on this frame, and because this embroidery is so light in colour, I want my frame to be something really dark so it draws everyone in, and I want my frame also to reflect the colours from within the piece itself. So when let me move this across. So what I am going to do for this frame is I'm going to paint the whole thing in this dark colour, which is a sort of, it's sort of like, it's almost like an iridescent blue. You sort of can see it. See the camera. Maybe you'll be able to see it. Almost in these areas, it's like teal. It's a really rich teal. So I'm going to have that on my outer. And then I've got this colour, which is a sort of real turquoise, which sort of matches up to this colour here. I'm going to have that for my inner. And then when it comes to doing my painted decoration, I've pulled out the purples I have, although we have a constant debate about whether this is purple or blue, but I've pulled out the purples. I've got these ones, I've got a couple of these. basically what I need to do is I'm going to paint it all up in the base colours first, and then I'm going to give it some thought what I want the decoration to be, and for the next video I will paint. So there we go. I hope you got some sewing done in that time, and I will see you for the next video where I decorate the frame in a week or so.